Thank you for joining us. This is another week of the Laws That Matter. Today we have a very special guest, international lecturer, author, bestseller, Victoria Moran. My phone's ringing. Sorry, guys. I don't know if you heard that, but I did. Hi, Victoria. Let me start that over because my phone was ringing in my ear when that happened. I could hear it. But basically today, Victoria, you're a best-selling author. You are a host of Main Street Vegan, which I was on your show. You've spoken, you've inspired people about veganism and spirituality, and you've done so many wonderful things in your life and in your career. You were on Oprah. That's already impressive enough. I feel like if anyone's been on Oprah, it's like the instant stamp of credibility. But let's get right into it. I think what inspires me most about you is your ability to have an intersection of spirituality and veganism. And that is important because there are so many people on this planet who are on a spiritual path but have not made the connection to the food on their plate. So what would you say to somebody who you met today that is not vegan but is a conscious, awake person?
Well, probably the most effective thing to say is, here, try this mushroom stroganoff. Because I think sometimes whether people are spiritual or not, we can communicate to them more clearly with food than through anything else. But for me, spirituality and veganism have always been very, very closely entwined. And from a historical perspective, vegetarianism came into the world and made its way from India into the Western world on the backs of religious teaching. And it's found in every religious teaching in the world. But it's an interesting thing that whether we're looking at antiquity or a while ago or now, it's much easier for people to agree to something on a philosophical level. Like when people are interviewed about, do you think that it's good for animals to have rights? Do you think it's bad to harm animals? Everybody is like, well, of course they should have rights. Of course it's terrible to harm them. But then when it goes on to say, and so are you willing to change how you eat? All of a sudden, they're much less interested in that. So I think that the other thing with spiritual people and religious people is, I think for all of us, once we get some of these ideas and we start applying them in our lives, whether it's a feeling of salvation in a traditional religious, such as Christian sense, or whether it's we get involved in some sort of meditation practice and we start to have more peace and more clarity in our life, then we feel like, okay, I've got it. I'm good now. And then somebody comes along and says, well, yeah, you're good. However, you'd be better if you could add in this part. And then we're going to get a lot of pushback.
So what would you say to someone who's a religious person and a good person that would push back on the veganism using religion as an argument?
Yeah. Well, I think it's the idea of just opening more broadly. So Albert Schweitzer, who was a Christian minister, medical doctor, missionary, had talked about expanding our circle of compassion to include all that has life. And so we're just asking people to expand. And it's very interesting right now in history when white people are being asked to expand their understanding and acceptance of what African American people and some other people of color in other ways have been going through in this country for a very long time. And so if for some people that's not so hard, for some people it's really hard. It's like changing, wait, this is how I grew up and now you're asking me to stretch. And yet the freedom, when you're able to make that stretch and really come to embrace others, is such a wonderful thing. So in this work, in the vegan world, in the animal rights world, we're asking people to stretch beyond fellow humans to embrace others. And I think we need to reach people where they are. Somebody used to teach for Main Street Vegan Academy, the course that I offer to train vegan lifestyle coaches and educators. And he would say, you want to watch people's body language when you tell them your vegan story. So if you say, well, you used to be on Lipitor and now you're not, and they're just sitting there like, yeah, who cares? And you say, did you know how many animals are killed and how terribly they're treated? And the person is just like glossing over like, yeah, they're animals, what's the difference? But then maybe you say, but animal agriculture causes more global warming gases to go out into the atmosphere than all transportation combined. And then they lean forward and they're like, what? I never heard that. It could have been one of the other things that got them interested. So I think we need to meet people where they are. And with spiritual people, I don't know that it's necessarily the right thing to say, well, you know, this will make you more spiritual. But I think just to kind of suggest some of the connections to someone's own path. So a little interesting piece of Christian history that anybody can look up and find is that the early Christians, those who lived within the first 100, 200 years after Jesus was on earth, were overwhelmingly vegetarian. And that probably meant vegan because in those days it would have just been impractical to get eggs or dairy when you weren't also having meat. And this is something that many people, unless they've really studied theology in an academic sense, they just don't know about. And it's a little bit of an eye-opener. And so in the yogic tradition, for instance, it's always been highly recommended that one practice ahimsa, that one certainly be vegetarian. Now, we do run into the Indian tradition and a connection to dairy, and so that's a little more of a hurdle to go over. But to just get people just connected through their own tradition. And the fact is, there is nothing in any religion that tells people that it is wrong or that it is not part of their faith to be vegetarian or vegan. I had an interesting experience a year ago when the premiere of the film that I produced, A Prayer for Compassion, was happening in New York City, and we were sold out. So people were calling me to try to get tickets. And I had within 1 hour, 2 interesting phone calls. One came from a gentleman who was an Orthodox Jew and his son was in a yeshiva. The father was vegan and was wanting his son to be vegan as well, but the son was getting so much pushback at school and he was being told that being vegan was not Jewish. And in less than an hour, I got a call from a woman who lives upstate in a Christian community where she was being told that being vegan was not Christian. And yet, both of these traditions look at the book of Genesis, where the original diet for humans was fruits and nuts. And then even after the fall, we got the green vegetables. We were not told to go out and eat meat. And it's amazing to me.
Yeah. Genesis 1-9, right?
That's the one.
Yeah.
And I love it. Bible scholars will tell you that word that's translated as behold, I have given you every herb-bearing seed, that it's very, very unusual for Yahweh to couch something and, hey, this is important. Look at this. Listen to this. This is a big deal. And it was a very big deal when humans were told what to eat. And I say that as a biblical literalist, which I am not. So whether we're looking at it as history, which I know some people do, or more as a beautiful metaphorical story, the idea that it was recognized even in the depths of antiquity that humans are anatomically plant and that peace on earth, like we see in the Isaiah prophecies, is never going to happen as long as we're killing animals for food.
It's true. I'm there. That's why there's the World Peace Diet, and then you have the karmic diet
diet, the
karma diet, because you are what you eat. What would you say to somebody who says that, well, God gave us dominion over the animals?
Yeah, that's really tricky. Whenever people start picking apart scriptures, and we certainly know that about the Bible because that's our culture, but I'm sure it happens everywhere with all the scriptures of the world. These are really magical texts, and they can be interpreted on so many levels. And on the one hand, there are stories there that even little children can understand, and yet somebody can spend their whole life simply studying one book. So that dominion issue is very beautifully treated in A Prayer for Compassion by both Jeffrey Cohen, who's the executive director of Jewish Veg, and also Susie Welch, who's a TV personality, the widow of the legendary GE CEO Jack Welch, and she's an evangelical Christian as well as a vegan. And so they both describe that what dominion is, and when you look at the Hebrew word, which Jeffrey can say and I can't, it's talking about the kind of care that God has over humans and really over all creation. It's sort of like someone would say, congratulations, here's your beautiful new baby. And you have dominion over this baby, not to eat the baby, not to be cruel to the baby, but because you have some advantages in terms of experience and maturity and resources, you can care for this child. And so humans were told that we're to care for creation, and we have not done a great job of it.
Yeah, I see it that way too. I think, we are supposed to be made in the image of this higher power or of God, and God is supposed to be kind to us, and therefore and he has dominion over us, and therefore we should have our kindness extended to all creation and all beings and all earthlings. So meeting people where they are and inspiring them to go vegan, or with you said you started with vegetarian. What inspired you initially?
Well, I always had a connection. I remember the first time I heard the word vegetarian. I was 5 years old, and I came home from school all excited to share with my nanny, who was really spiritual, the 4 food groups, which at that time it was the meat group, the dairy group, the fruit and vegetable group, and the bread and cereals group. So basically, if you were a vegan, you got rid of half the food groups. It seemed like a sheer road to starvation. So I came home and I made my recitation to her, and she said, well, there are people who never eat any meat, and they're called vegetarians. And I could take you to a restaurant and get you a burger made out of peanuts, and you'd think you were having beef. And I remember thinking as a little kid, wow, there's so much I don't know. And I have a feeling I'm not going to learn all of it at school. So I didn't know what to do with this, because we're talking the 1950s, and it's Kansas City, Missouri, which at that time still was the second biggest city for stockyards in the country. And yet it stayed with me and kind of germinated there. I tried to be vegetarian when I was 13. It lasted about 4 months. I got really hungry because I was basically eating fruit cocktail and cottage cheese. But when I started reading about yoga when I was 17, and it's hard to really get a grasp now that at that time, yoga was something very odd that you had to really seek out and discover. There were 3 books in the Kansas City, Missouri library, and I read all of them over and over. And they all said that if you want to be serious about yoga, you have to be vegetarian. So I did manage to do that. I moved to London when I was 18 to go to fashion school, and there was a lot more vegetarian stuff going on in London than there was at that time in Kansas City. So, slowly and gradually I started on the path. And so for me, even though I always loved animals and had wanted to do this originally for the animals, it was yoga. It was a spiritual tradition that actually got me over the hump to begin on the path that would ultimately lead to veganism.
And you started out with your first book in 1985 that had the intersection of veganism and spirituality. And I would like to know how you were received in the vegan community delivering a spiritual message, and how you were received in the mainstream community delivering a vegan intersection message with spirituality.
Well, that book I never thought would be a book. What happened was I went to college late. So I was 29, 30, and I was getting a bachelor's degree in comparative religions at North Central College outside Chicago. And I earned a fellowship for foreign study. So the only requirement was that whatever I chose to study, I would leave North America to do it. And there were so vegans in the US and Canada at that time that this institution of higher learning was actually willing to fund my trip to go over to the UK to study vegans. And it made perfect sense to do this study within a context of religion and spirituality, because this was still most of the people who'd like, who do you know who's vegetarian? And people would go, Mahatma Gandhi, you know, so there was some kind of connection. People knew he was Hindu and that somehow there was some kind of connection there. So it was magnificent to do that study in London in, I think it was 1980, maybe 81. And I got to meet some of the people from the founding of the Vegan Society, which was founded in London back in the 1940s. And when they went vegan, they didn't know what would happen to them, because almost nobody that they knew of had ever done it before. I remember meeting one woman, Kathleen Janaway, who said in her fabulous aristocratic British accent, "We didn't know if our bones would disintegrate or if we'd perish in a fortnight. We did this out of pure, disinterested compassion." And I remember thinking, oh, I want to be you when I grow up. Because at this time, I still hadn't made it to full-time vegan. You know, I'd be vegan for a month or 3 months or 6 months, but I was dealing with an eating disorder and, you know, I'd fall off the wagon. And so I met these people and thought they were just so divine. And when the book did come out, it was very well received in the vegan world, because I may not be accurate about this, but as far as I have been able to ascertain, that book, when it was published by Thorson's, which was at that time distributed by Harper back in 1985, was the first book on vegan philosophy and practice to ever come from an actual publishing house. There were books from the Vegan Society and the American Vegan Society, but I think that was the first one from a publisher. So the vegan world just, you know, loved it. You know, there was a book for them, and it was beautiful cover with that lovely painting of the peaceable kingdom. And that was terrific. But the outside world, other than my mother, who gave copies to all her friends, it didn't get a lot of attention, because at that time, even being vegetarian was so odd, and it had attached to it all of these kinds of reputation points, like, oh, well, if you're a hippie or you're a counterculture or you're a religious fanatic or you're something weird. And vegan was just so far out there that I was scared. And yeah,
I get it, because I was raised vegan.
Yeah.
So I know what it was. And you raised your daughter vegan, but I know that it was very taboo. You've been a vegan for 3 decades now, right?
Almost 4. Yeah, I've been
almost 4 now. Wow.
36 years and a vegetarian for, I guess, 51.
So you've been a vegan as long as me.
Oh.
So things have changed a lot in the last 30 years. But I know you're saying, oh, my book didn't get the attention in the mainstream world as it did in the vegan world, but you still did something right, because you ended up on Oprah not once, but twice.
Yeah.
So how did that happen?
Well, my second book was also about veganism. It was called The Love Powered Diet, and it's had several lifetimes. So most recently, a 2009 edition, and that's about overcoming my binge eating disorder and doing that as a vegan. So it's very spiritual. The first half is spiritual because it was a spiritual recovery program that really changed my relationship to food, that enabled me to finally be vegan full time. So the Love Powered Diet happened. And then I wrote a book called Get the Fat Out, back when low fat was going around the first time. And then I thought, what else can I say about animals and vegetables? And I had this degree in comparative religions and always very interested in spirituality. So then I moved into writing in that area. So I wrote a book called Shelter for the Spirit. That was what got me on Oprah the first time. That's about making your home nurture your soul. And I always put a little bit of vegan in the books, just letting people know. And I'd always say that I'm vegetarian, because vegan, most people didn't even know what it meant. And so it was really in that self-help world that the Oprah happened, and that my reputation built in the late 90s and early 2000s. And in 2011, I went to a Peta fundraiser and saw some videos. And by then, I'd already been in this work for so long. I had seen videos like that before, but for some reason, my heart was extra open that night. And all I wanted was to do something substantive to help animals. And I was in the subway going home, and I was just complaining to God that I wish I could have written a check to Peta for $100,000, but I didn't have it to spare. And God said, that's okay. Here's what you can do. You can write a book called Main Street Vegan and give it 40 little chapters, put a recipe at the end of each one. And I'm like, okay, I can do that. And that's really brought me back into the vegan world, professionally as well as personally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's so important. And what about the MEND program? I love that. Tell us about that.
That's a little acronym that I have come up with for good health, for aging well. And MEND is based on something my grandmother used to talk about. When somebody kind of, there'd be a news report, a politician, went off the rails or did something he shouldn't have done. And she would always say, well, now he just needs to mend his ways. Well, what if we could mend our ways and maybe erase what we ate a couple of weeks ago or drank back in college or whatever it is? And we can do that with MEND, which stands for meditation, exercise, nourishment, and detoxification. And
I love that.
It's so helpful. And sometimes all I have to do is, okay, where am I today with all those things? Did I meditate this morning? Yeah. And did I exercise? Well, not yet, but I'm signed up for a yoga class this afternoon. How was my nourishment? Oh, maybe not the world's best breakfast, but that means I'm going to eat a whole lot of greens at lunch. It's just a wonderful way to kind of keep myself on target with the self-care.
Mm-hmm. And I've seen A Prayer for Compassion, and I actually watched it again last night, so it was fresh in my mind. And there was another acronym that was mentioned there, and it was LOVE, LOVE. Do you remember what that one stands for?
I always forget E. It's live, organic, vegan,
ethical.
Ethical, is that it? Okay, that's from Dr. Silas Rao of Climate Healers.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Acronyms rock.
Yeah, but I love that one too. I mean, because that is the definition of love, being ethical. And I think that it's important that, you brought up extending our circle of compassion and what's going on with African American lives and racism. And I think that the vegan movement extends beyond animals. There's the animal rights movement, and then there's the vegan movement. And the animal movement is for animals, but vegans are for justice, and they stand up against suffering in all forms.
Yes,
we can't stand for it.
I agree. And so many people are becoming dietary vegans, and they'll usually call themselves plant-based for their own health. And they wake up to these other issues too. You can't open this door and get into this vegan world without discovering everything that's back here. And it's dizzying sometimes. There's so much, and it's all transformational and exciting and fresh. I had a reason last night to have to Google my maiden name. And I married my first husband when I was 27. So we're talking 1977. So the stuff that I found was all from the early 70s when I was in my 20s. And just doing this kind of stuff way back then. And it's animals and it's health And back then we talked more about world hunger. We didn't talk quite so much about the environment because the environment wasn't in such a mess, but we still had that message. We knew that it was very inefficient to grow all this plant food and cycle it through animals. And so it's a beautiful evolutionary thing that has now grown to be something that people recognize. So back in the day, it was weird. You'd say you were vegan and they'd say you're what? Like
People still are like that. I'll go on an airplane and I will often get asked the question by the person next to me, what is the difference between vegetarian and vegan? A lot of people still don't know, even though it's a lot more mainstream than it used to be.
Yes. Well, I think that's what we have to do, and this is kind of spiritual too, is it's our job to really live aspirationally. So we need to be radiating some kind of happiness and joy and contentment. And sometimes we have to act as if, because we don't always feel that every single time we get on an airplane. But we want people to get the idea that if they do this, there's going to be something in it for them. So we want to be reasonably healthy. You know, we don't want to set ourselves up some kind of thing like if you get sick, you're a bad vegan. No, if you get sick, you're a human. That's what happens. But generally speaking, we want to be as content, as kind, as open, and as healthy as we can possibly be, because we're trying to interest people in doing something that their basic self-interest says no to. Nobody wants to change how they eat. This is why diets fail so miserably. So we need to present this as something so uplifting and empowering. And the truth is, we know that it is because we live it.
Right. It's a lifestyle. It's not really a diet once you are committed to it. And I think that, you mentioned earlier that some people are inspired to become vegan because of the animals, some people because of the environment, some people because of their own health. But I think a component that is often left out is some people are inspired to become vegan because of the spiritual aspect, the karmic aspect, the ingesting of the fear and the suffering of the animals. And by passively eating it, you are actively contributing by spending $1 for it. So what prompted you, because you're one of the leaders in the vegan world that has truly linked it to spirituality, and I think that there are a lot of spiritual people on the path that could benefit from your words. So how would you inspire a spiritual person to make that connection?
Well, believe me, I would love to. You were talking before we went live about some of the wonderful authors in the spirituality world who are not vegan and they have lots of followers listening to them. And how do we reach them? I think that it has to be celebratory. Like, you are cool. Look at all you've come to. Look at all you have opened to. And now let's look at this. And the pushback, people will say, well, I pray for the soul of the animal. Please. If I were mugged in a dark alley and the guy said a prayer for me, I would be just as disheartened to have lost my life as if he hadn't said the prayer. So, let's not let our spiritual beliefs get in the way of the actual truth of what's going on. These animals are raised in ways that are absolutely horrific. Another thing you'll hear from a lot of spiritual people, a lot of woke people, is they'll say, well, I only eat humane meat. Well, let's just deconstruct that for a minute. Number one, let's just pretend that you really could.
I want you to go here. I saw in a prayer for compassion last night that the story you told with the third cow that was going, that really got to me with the whistle. So I want you to tell that story.
I will happily tell that story. So just to finish the thought about the so-called humane meat, life on a farm has never been idyllic for animals, even in the olden days. And my grandparents had a farm outside Columbia, Missouri. And we're talking about they were there from the 1930s through the 1950s. That was a while ago. And it was not a factory farm, but the pigs were still castrated without anesthesia. Things went on that were just not great. And of course, chickens got their necks wrung. That was just the way it was even then. And now, of course, with the confined animal feeding operations, it's so much worse. And there's so little of this kind of agriculture. The people that I know who are spiritual, probably 80-90% of them tell me that that's where they get their meat. But only 10% of the animal products are raised that way. So how can 80% of the spiritual people be eating it when there's so little of it? So basically, that's a moot point. So the cow that
there's no such thing as humane murder.
It's not.
Okay. And I know that the story that you reminded me of the story that I want you to tell, because that story came from not a factory farm.
Mm-hmm.
So,
well,
there's no such thing as humane.
I'll tell the story. So this was a long time ago. This was after I was living in a rural part of Missouri, which was odd. I'm an urban person, but I found myself living in the country. And I had been vegan for several years at that point, and mentioned to one of my friends there that as much as I had done in the vegan world and the vegetarian world prior, I had never been in a slaughterhouse. And she said, "Oh, my husband's friend runs a slaughterhouse. His father owns it. So he'd take you through it, I'm sure." So we told him that I was a home economics graduate student, and he was very happy to show me the family business. And we got all dressed in surgical masks and shoe coverings, and it was like we were going in to perform surgery. But instead, we walked into hell. I really did feel like this guy was Virgil and I was Dante, and he was taking me through the depths of hell. The smells were indescribable. The sounds, the screams of the animals, the cacophony of the machinery. My heart so went out to the workers, which was not something that I expected at all. I thought they were going to be the enemy. It took me 10 minutes to figure, no, there are two sets of victims here, the animals certainly, but also these people who don't have a choice about where they're going to work. There's just not much here. And they don't want to be standing in a refrigerator, ankle deep in blood, using sharp instruments. The whole thing was just awful, really, really awful. And I'm so glad I did it when I did it, because now I don't think I could. But at the very end of the day, after I had just been through all of this from 9 in the morning till 5 in the evening, finally, the end of the day, a farmer drives up with a pickup truck, and there were, I think, 3 cows in it, 2 or 3 cows. He was a very small operation driving the cows here himself. And so the first cow went up the ramp and on to death, but this one was not having any of it, because she could smell the smells, she could hear the sounds, she could feel that vibrational essence of all of the death and the fear, and she was not going to have one bit of it. So she just planted herself on the ramp, and the man who was supposed to get her with the captive bolt pistol and render her unconscious, which is a mercy when it works, whistled to her. So he whistled to her the way he would whistle to his dog. And she just kind of turned her head, and you could just kind of tell, and I may be anthropomorphizing here, but this was my impression at the time being there, was she was trying to get it. Am I supposed to go with my instincts? Am I supposed to go with what I'm smelling and hearing? Or am I supposed to trust this man? And she went with trust. And she walked up and she walked to her death. And what I said in the movie, and I also tell this story in my book, Main Street Vegan, is the people who bought her parts and pieces were good people, and they tried to do their best in life, but they didn't know her, and I did. And so it's my responsibility to tell her story. And I just urge everybody out there who has a story, it's so powerful and it's so important. And we think about historical images, photographs, little anecdotes. They're just really powerful. And you wouldn't be listening to this if you didn't have one or several. So pull them out and share them with people. It's really going to reach somebody.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the best way to reach people is through storytelling, because that brings an empathetic, compassionate component to the facts. So it is moving. So earlier in the show, you said that you're getting back into yoga.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what is that connection doing for you in terms of veganism? And I think you said Ayurvedic yoga, which is fond of dairy. So how is that working for you?
Yeah. Well, I never really left yoga and Ayurveda, which is a wonderful healing system that grew up alongside yoga. Some people know this as the tradition out of which Deepak Chopra came.
Mm-hmm.
And so these are both very exciting to me right now. So I never left yoga, but now I'm taking a yoga teacher training class on Zoom. Like, we're doing everything on Zoom. And so to really get into those teachings, to really read the Bhagavad Gita, to really read the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali has just been such an incredible gift. And what it's telling me is that this whole way of living that is about ahimsa, which is harmlessness and non-killing and reverence for life, that is the very first yama, the very first moral precept of yoga. And all the others come after that. Not lying, not stealing, being responsible sexually, all these other things that we think of as basic yogic values, basic spiritual values. The very first one is ahimsa. And so a lot of people say, well, I'm doing spiritual practice and I'm involved in this cause and that cause and some other cause. I can't get into the vegan thing. Well, guess what? You're going to be eating anyway. So just eat as a vegan and do your spiritual practice and be involved in your causes. And, you're not spending any more time, but it's all good. So in terms of Ayurveda and dairy, in the Indian tradition, there is a appreciation for the cow. We've all heard, sacred cow, but somehow they didn't get the message in that teaching that in order to provide milk, a cow has to have a calf and they're separated, and it's a terrible thing. So India, despite this beautiful, beautiful tradition of vegetarianism and this appreciation for the sacred nature of the cow, is the biggest leather importer in the world.
That's shocking. And I did not know that until I saw a prayer for compassion.
Yeah. So in the Ayurvedic world, very often I'll talk to an Ayurvedic specialist or physician, and, they'll say that I should be using ghee or something because of my body type. And it's like, I'm just not going to do that. And very often authority figures, whether we were talking medical doctors or traditional Chinese doctor, any kind of doctor, they're not used to having people argue with them. People don't usually say, no, I value what you say. I respect your knowledge. This is a line that I do not cross. And so, they're being educated too. And I get so much out of Ayurveda. Oh my goodness. So the dairy is just a little tiny part of it. Ayurveda is really a way to live. It's a daily routine that really promotes health and longevity. The very word means science of long life. So I highly recommend. There's a wonderful cookbook from the book publishing company called the Ayurvedic Vegan Kitchen. So all the recipes already have the dairy gone. So you can just jump in from the beginning as a vegan. And, all these things, and this is another thing I try to encourage vegans, it's like, don't leave your other life. Because if you're part of a spiritual community, if you have a hobby, if there's some other cause that has nothing to do with animals or diet or any of that, be there, and be there as a vegan so all these people can see how cool you are. And maybe if they've known you for a long time, how they're on all kinds of medication as they get to be 50 and 60 and whatever, and you're not. And, one at a time. It's a ripple, because people see you and then they change.
Yeah, it's true. People are inspired to change. So you have a weekly show, Main Street Vegan. I was on your podcast about a year ago, and I know it's on Unity Radio. What is the background of Unity Radio, spirituality, and veganism?
Oh, thank you for asking. It's really quite fascinating. Unity is a very liberal church in the Christian tradition, but very open to all religions. And the belief is that every spiritual path is getting us all home, walking one another back home, as it were. So it was founded in the 1890s by a married couple in my hometown, Kansas City, Missouri. And they became vegetarian. Their printer was a Seventh-day Adventist, and that's the one Protestant denomination that's to this day recommends vegetarianism to its members. And also at the World Congress of Religions held in Chicago in 1893, they met Swami Vivekananda, who was the first yogi from India to visit the US. And with these influences, they became very vegetarian. Now, veganism didn't exist then, and so they didn't know about veganism. They didn't probably know it was even possible, but they absolutely did not eat meat, fish, or fowl. They didn't wear leather, and they printed Bibles at that time, and they actually used a faux leather covering. It was something, I think it was called Caratol, that was available back in the 1890s. I mean, this is just absolutely stunning to me. Mm-hmm. So at that time, they had a vegetarian column in their primary publication. One of their sons was vice president of the International Vegetarian Union, and not eating animals was in their original 32 statements of faith. But as things happen and everything changes on earth, that's what the Buddha says, and he's really right on that. And so of their three sons, the one who took over was the one who ate meat. And so the vegetarian teachings kind of fell away. But when the person who headed up Unity Online Radio read Main Street Vegan back when it was new, she called me and said, "Do you want a radio show? You can call it Main Street Vegan. It's about time we get back to our roots." So Unity Online Radio has a lot of wonderful programming that is more in the metaphysical, the new thought, the new age world. But they have Main Street Vegan, and also the wonderful vegan chef, the jazzy vegetarian Laura Theodore, also has a show on Unity Online Radio. And it's interesting to see how many ministers nowadays are saying, this was part of this tradition and we need to get it back. There's a wonderful minister named Carol Saunders who has put together a collection of the writings of Charles Fillmore. And anybody listening to this who is of the kind of more new age persuasion would find this really fascinating, because he wrote in depth about just what you mentioned, what happens with those pain poisons and those fear poisons that come into the animals, and then we ingest that. And some of this kind of free-floating anxiety, and why are we nervous all the time, and why are we always looking over our shoulders? It is not impossible that some of that could come from this fear that people who eat meat ingest, in some cases 3 times a day.
I think, and not only does it affect them, I think it affects every single being on this planet. How can it not, when trillions of animals are killed violently for food and other products for us? And that fear, that energy is not just a stench that you smell, it's a heavy energy that's released into our atmosphere. I think that there's probably a connection to depression and anxiety that we all can feel at points in our lives, and we don't even know exactly where it's coming from. But when we have that kind of violence projected as a society to billions and billions of beings, how can we not have that in our atmosphere affecting us all spiritually?
It has to, especially to people who are sensitive. And so often people who are drawn to a spiritual path, drawn to religion or non-religious spirituality, they're drawn because they're sensitive, because they're seeking, because they're trying to make sense out of everything. And these are usually people who, if they saw an injured animal, maybe a bird with a broken wing or something of that nature, they would be there, like, right, Johnny on the spot. And yet then they go back to their chicken sandwich because we
Yeah,
have
it's a
connection.
disconnect, such a disconnect. I know actually my mom sent me a video yesterday on Facebook of these guys saving these baby ducklings in a gutter, and the mom was standing by the gutter quacking because she wanted her babies out, and they had a whole rescue team rescuing these little baby chicks out of the gutter, and it was a feel-good story. And that crossed my mind as soon as it was over that I bet those guys are going home and eating a chicken sandwich or a chicken breast, and there's just a disconnect. If you're not at the slaughterhouse and you're not killing them yourself, and it's packaged with saran wrap over it and styrofoam and seasoned with ketchup and barbecue sauce and garlic, you're not thinking about the life on the plate, and you're not honoring it by not thinking about it. So
I think, Carissa, that's important for all of us to do who are vegan is to just make it normal. To instead of going to the restaurant and saying, oh, I don't mean to bother you and cause extra trouble, but I really need this to be with no Parmesan and no cheese. Can you check and make sure the pasta doesn't have egg in it? I'm sorry. No, we're not sorry. It's like, okay, you don't use pasta with egg in it, do you? You don't put Parmesan on that. You do? I mean, this day, I mean, seriously, I mean, I'm just surprised because people have so awakened to the cruelty of that industry. I mean, we need to own that we're doing the normal thing. We're doing the right thing. We are making our way in history. And the rest, it's gonna go. I mean, a vegan world will happen, and it can either happen joyfully because everybody excitedly wants to have all the wonderful food and the wonderful feelings that result from living this way, or it's going to happen because the state of the planet and the extinctions are going to get to the point where we're forced into it, and nobody wants to be forced into anything.
Right. And right now with our planet, I think we have Mother Nature intervening. I always say that lessons can be joyfully shared or painfully taught. So I think that goes with what you just said, that we can all get on this train and say, oh my gosh, this food is delicious and I feel better and the planet's better for it. And it's not a sacrifice. It tastes good, which it's not a sacrifice because even world's largest meat producers are debuting vegan range lines, which my company is certifying vegan. But it's not a sacrifice, or we're going to continue to ruin our rainforest and ruin our health and murder the animals. And eventually our planet can't sustain it and we will be forced down this path.
And something also for spiritual people, you're already helping people feel better about themselves. And people who feel better about themselves have a much easier time making a change to feel even better. People, when you feel good about yourself, you want to do self-care. When you don't, you just don't care. You want the path of least resistance. So as we go out there in the world saying, yeah, be vegan and eat healthy and be kind and all that, and somebody feels like they're not deserving, they're not worthy, what they do doesn't matter, then it's going to be a lot harder for them to make these changes. So for people who are already on a spiritual path and you're already uplifting humans, just uplift them just one bit further to make these changes that will be better for them and for the animals and for the world.
I have like 3 more questions because I know we're running out of time and I want to get them out. So you run an academy, Main Street Vegan Academy. Tell us about that, and then tell us how you bring spirituality into your teachings there.
Sure, thank you. Main Street Vegan Academy was one of the many things that came into the world with the publication of Main Street Vegan. I'm so grateful. And the Academy, up until now, has always been only in person in New York City, a 6-day jam-packed intensive with field trips, and fabulous faculty and all that. But with COVID-19, of course, we've just put the first class on Zoom. So now we have a completely different model. We're going to be doing Zoom classes 3 times a year. and would call that MSV Zoom. And then we will have one class a year in New York City. So that's July 2021. We're calling that MSV Elite. So there are now 2 ways to get the program. And Zoom, of course, is very cost effective, and you don't have to fly to New York City and find a place to stay. So basically, whether you're taking the course live in person or live on Zoom, that is a way to get yourself certified as a vegan lifestyle coach and educator. So the requirement is you have to already be vegan and want to up your game. So our curriculum has a vegan fundamental basis, then it has communication, and then it has business skills, so that as you climb this ladder, you're able to go out into the world and set yourself up coaching, teaching, writing, or in business. And it's absolutely amazing to me that in our 8 years of being in existence, we have graduates from 30 countries on 6 continents.
Wow.
And in addition to coaching, and I would never say quit your day job, because, most of our graduates are still doing other things and doing their vegan work on the side, but some of them are 100% making their living in some sort of vegan enterprise. And many have started businesses. So there's a wonderful bakery in Miami Beach, L'Artisan. That's one of our graduates. They'd only been open 2 weeks when they won Best Croissant in Miami, which is very cool. Kat Mendenhall in Dallas has vegan and eco-friendly cowboy boots. We've got a V-Marks the Shop, a little bodega, charming, in Philadelphia. In Colombia, there's a young woman with a family business called Crema, which is cheese and yogurt. And we also have a cheese and yogurt company in New York called Bright Life, and Cheese Shops, Riverdale. These are all graduates of Main Street Vegan Academy. So
wow, Riverdale, I didn't know that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, a lot of inspiration, wonderful faculty. So check us out at mainstreetvegan.net.
Okay, so hopefully everyone got that. And when is your next academy?
The next Zoom Academy is January. And the next one in New York is July 2021.
Okay. What are you most excited about?
This is such an interesting time that it's very easy to get discouraged. And so I'm grateful for every spiritual thing I have ever learned. And very often I have to remind myself that I learned them because they're not like first in mind right now. So I guess for me, I'm very excited about a really basic spiritual teaching, which is to live one day at a time. Because we don't really know what the future holds, but we do know that what we do today is building our own personal future. And so all the good that we can put out into the world today is absolutely important and critical. I'm also really excited about a campaign that I'm working on, and I know your colleague and mine, Jane Velez Mitchell, is part of this, and that is boycott meat, or hashtag boycott meat. And we're working with people who are very concerned about the slaughterhouse workers who are exposed at a very high rate to COVID-19. And trying to encourage people who have maybe never thought about veganism or vegetarianism or plant-based or animal rights or any of that, but who really are disturbed by the fact that people are being forced into plants where the likelihood of their getting sick is very high, to provide a product that is supposedly essential. And it's not. I mean, the last time I had a piece of meat, Lyndon Johnson was in the White House. It is not essential. And so I'm excited that hopefully we're going to reach a lot of people who haven't thought about this before, and that this effort will really get a message out to the meat industry that they really need to start caring. And as you said, they've already invested in changing some of their infrastructure to making some plant-based products. They need to just become meatless plants and just go vegan, and we'll get the rest all worked out.
Yeah, it's horrible what's going on with the slaughterhouse workers. I mean, what's happened with that executive order? We've stripped them of all their essential constitutional rights by not giving them the right to have an injury claim. They can't do a wrongful death claim. They're at risk every day because meat is supposedly essential when it's not essential. There are millions of vegans and vegetarians surviving and thriving on a vegan plant-based diet. So I think it's wonderful that there's mainstream organizations that are organizing around this cause of boycott meat. So
yeah,
the mainstream.
Yeah, I think it's very exciting because we were talking earlier about so much of our work as vegans is within the vegan world. And it's important because there is recidivism with vegans. You know, it's very difficult if you're the only vegan you know, and maybe there's somebody in your family who gives you a hard time about it. So to keep vegans inspired and engaged is important. But we also want to get out to other people, and boycott meat is such a great way to do that, because we're not saying you have to go vegan for the rest of your life. Just for right now, while this is going on, boycott meat. And of course, what we're going to see is that people find out how great the food is, how good they feel, how low their cholesterol goes. And a lot of those people may stick with it. But for now, let's just get them to boycott meat and see what happens with that.
Well, and that goes right back to your lesson of taking it one day at a time. Because if you do it one day at a time and you are in your present moment consciousness and you are living according to the power of now, you will just come to a realization without feeling like it's forced upon you.
Absolutely.
Okay. Last question, and then we have to go. But some people don't know if they join later in the show. What was it like being on Oprah? Was that totally real? I mean, that's like being on Oprah's like, I've reached the pinnacle. I've arrived. I've made it. Oprah's blessed my career. So you've made it there not once, but twice.
Yeah, it really was like that because I wanted it so much. I mean, you know, I was writing self-help books and I was supposed to be on Oprah. I mean, that's just what you did. And so I was supposed to have been on before I was. So they called me and they said, okay, so hang tight over the weekend. We're looking at Tuesday. And they said, yeah, you're going to be around next week, right? And I said, well, I'm getting married on Saturday. And they said, I hope you're not planning to take a honeymoon. And I said, well, we were. They said, it really wouldn't be a good idea. So I talked with my then fiance and we canceled our honeymoon and waited on Monday for the call from the Oprah people. And when it came, they said, the show has taken a different direction. Oh, it was just devastating. So when it finally happened, just over a year later, they actually wanted that original book called Shelter for the Spirit. And I was out on the road on tour with the next book, which was Creating a Charmed Life, which turns out to have been my biggest book ever, big bestseller, 30 languages and all of that. But when the Oprah people called and they said, we want you with Shelter for the Spirit. And I said, oh, no, you don't understand. The new book is Creating a Charmed Life. And there was this pause. And in that pause, I could hear authors are a dime a dozen. And the producer said, we want Shelter for the Spirit. So it was like, okay, yes, ma'am, what are we doing? And at that time, they had a segment called Remembering Your Spirit. And they were going to do a show that day about organizing. And they wanted something about home and spirituality, Remembering Your Spirit segment. So they sent a crew to my house in Kansas City. So I spent one day cleaning everything, cellar to and then they did a beautiful, beautiful segment. But I still hadn't been to Chicago. I hadn't been there in the Sanctum Sanctorum. And that happened a couple of years later. I had moved to New York and had a book called Lit from Within about bringing out your inner beauty. And sure enough, that time I got to go to Chicago and be there in the midst of everything. And if people do go to my website, mainstreetvegan.net, I've got a little TV reel on the homepage that has a clip from that Oprah show. So to say, what was it like? It was really being in the presence of greatness. And my impression of Oprah was boundaries. That somebody with that level of influence really has to learn how to protect themselves psychically. And she so had that going on. She also seemed to have this ability to think ahead so that whatever somebody else was saying, she knew kind of 2 sentences ahead, sort of like a great chess player, how to make the move. And I had made a comment. We were talking that day about inner beauty, and a friend of mine who in this country would be considered quite overweight told about how she'd gone to India, and people were coming up to her and saying, you're so fat and so beautiful. I try to be fat, but I just can't do it. How do you do it? And Oprah just does this pregnant pause, and then she says, can't wait to go to India, and got thunderous laughter. I mean, the woman is absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, she's brilliant with humor and delivery.
Yeah,
and interviewing.
And I really think, now I read that she has sold her interest in Weight Watchers. I think we're going to get her on the vegan team. And I think a lot of people.
That would be the pinnacle for us all. Right?
It really would, because a lot of these other people that you talk about, authors in the spiritual world and people with, spiritual practices and followings and things like that, they'll be much more willing to look at this. So, come on.
I think Oprah on a soul level is so there. She's just on a physical level, which is where the struggle is for a lot of people, hasn't been able to make that leap. But on a soul level, like many of us, like many spiritual seekers on a path, they are there.
Yeah.
But anyway, we're out of time. Thank you, Victoria. I love being in your presence. I love being in your living room doing Main Street Vegan. So where should people go to find you, follow you?
Oh, you're so kind. MainStreetVegan.net has everything. It has the academy, the podcast, the blog, my books, a link to A Prayer for Compassion, which people can watch on Vimeo or Amazon Prime.
Right. And join your academy. If you want to
absolutely. Yeah, if you are vegan and you want to take your outreach to the next level or the professional level, do check out Main Street Vegan Academy. We're a family, and there's so much support, and nobody has ever been disappointed.
Thank you. Thanks, Victoria. I hope to see you soon in New York.
I hope so too. Take care.
Bye. Bye. Okay, and then the next segment of this show, which we do every week, is we feature a certified vegan product by BeVeg. We have a product of the week. And this week we have, you're here. Great. I wasn't sure.
Hi.
Yeah, hi. Hi, Louise. So tell us about your product, and we are thrilled to have it be vegan. I got it in the mail. Here it is.
Oh, good. Great.
And then I started drinking it here. Wait. It tastes like water. I was a little bit hesitant due to the coloring, but it just tastes like normal water. Tell us about it.
My sister and I started the company about 10 years ago. We were looking for ways to support our mom while she was going through chemo and radiation, and we wanted something that helped, take the toxicity out of her body as much as possible. We came across fulvic minerals, and the more we read, the more impressed we were, and we started giving it to her, but she wasn't a person that took good care of herself, and we had to kind of sneak it into her food. We put it in her coffee and in her tea and her juice and whatnot, and anyway, she actually made note that she felt better for taking it, so we were really surprised at that. Anyway, with a little R&D, we took it to the next level, and we decided rather than hide the fact that it was black, we were going to embrace it and launched Black Water.
What makes it black?
It's the fulvic minerals. They're organically extracted from the earth. Essentially, what it boils down to, which sounds kind of gross, is it's decayed plant matter. Over hundreds of thousands of millions of years, we get...
I would rather have decayed plant matter than decayed animal matter.
There you go.
And, they say a bottle of wine is better with age.
That's right.
So...
And is ours. It has a slight mineral taste to it, but...
I don't even taste that.
Yeah, a lot of people don't.
I just taste like water. It just tastes like complete water. Enjoy the dark side. you don't see the text until you drink it, because here. So how long ago did you start your company?
10 years.
10 years ago. And where can people find your products?
I'm in Canada right now, so I'm not aware of where we sell to, but I know we sell it in most places. If you go onto our website, www.getblk, you will find a list of stores. You put in your zip code.
Mm-hmm.
We sell it internationally as well. We sell in the UK. We sell in New Zealand, Australia, China, Middle East.
Well, we love that you're now certified vegan. A lot of beverages, if people don't know, are filtered sometimes through animal parts, and it's not only alcohol that does that. I know vegans are becoming more aware that alcohol might be fine through animal parts, whether it's gelatin, egg whites, isinglass. That same thing can go with juice and sodas. So this is a fully vegan product.
Yeah.
And at VVeg, we are a law firm that certifies vegan, because vegan right now is not defined legally, and there are there's no accountability in vegan claims without certification. So congratulations on your VVeg certification.
I'm thrilled that you guys are here and doing that, because it is needed out there.
Yeah. And just so if anyone's watching and they have a vegan product, they'd like to certify it vegan, if they go to the Jane Unchained website at the top here, and you go through her link, 100% of the certification fee will go to Jane Unchained News, so we can continue reporting on the laws that matter, and furthering our cause for justice for the animals and ending suffering for the world and the planet, so we can have a better home here on planet Earth. Is there anything else that you would like everyone to know about?
Blackwater, BLK, is extremely good.
Do you say BLK or do you say Blackwater? Like, what's the way to refer to it?
It's described as Blackwater. People usually know what that means. We use the acronym BLK. Yeah.
So it's BLK water.
Mm-hmm.
Very cool. So what would be the final note that you would want anyone to know about your water if they've never heard of it?
It tastes like water. Drink it. It's really good for you. It's water with more benefits.
Yeah, the benefits are the electrolytes, the minerals, 0 calories, 0 sugars, 0 caffeine, 0 flavoring, 0 dyes, which is important.
And that's only what we're allowed to put on the bottle. It chelates metals out of your body. It helps with gut health. It's an anti-inflammatory. All good.
And you have a patented mineral complex in this.
That's right. It's a fulvic mineral complex patent.
Yeah, but I don't know many beverages that have a patent.
I know.
I mean, there are trade secrets. There are trade secrets in beverages and foods and in products, but there's not always a patent. So that makes it extra special. Well, all right. Well, thank you. I know you have more products that are going through the vegan certification process, so we're excited to have them as well. But in the meantime, I can vouch for this one. It tastes just like water, and it's kind of fun to drink. It's black water. So anyway, thanks for joining us. And we will be back here next week, every Wednesday at noon, for the Laws That Matter. I'm Carissa Kranz. Thanks for joining us, and see you soon.